And I think a lot of people don't have the understanding, the visibility that this is going on. And it's the biggest potential story of all time.
Hey, folks, can you feel disclosure on the UFOs coming our way? Can you feel it? Is the government getting ready to tell you that maybe you are not alone in the universe? That's a weird thought, right? That maybe there are non-biologics. At least that's what we heard from one of the primary witnesses before Congress, David Grush, when he gave his testimony, that we are not alone in the universe and that our government has known about it. I don't know how you feel about that, but that to me is just mind-blowing. And I believe that we are closer to the truth than ever. And we have multiple reports that are expected to come out. One required by the Defense Authorization Act, another from NASA, which is due to come out anytime. And I believe that could happen, literally within the next few weeks. There is so much to discuss here. And I know some of you think like, oh, why is Sara talking about UAPs, UFOs again? Unidentified aerial phenomena, unidentified flying objects. Look, there are mysteries in the world. This is one of them. Our government, our U.S. military has been documenting this for decades now. This isn't some kind of ruse. This is very real. There is something going on. We don't know what that is. What we do know is that it poses a potential national security threat. And it also may give us the answers that many of us have been curious about, or that human beings have been curious about since the beginning, since we first existed. Are we alone in the universe? Is there something more to this? I have a deep faith in God. I am a Christian. And I know some people don't believe that there is anything beyond this right here, and that's okay. And maybe there isn't. But I would like to know, with all of the billions and billions of stars in our universe, all of the possibilities, all of the planets that we are now detecting that could possibly sustain life, some that scientists are absolutely positive could sustain life, but are too far away for us to reach right now. Is there something else out there, an intelligence that's also looking for answers? I'm the first one to tell you I don't have answers to anything. I just keep asking questions, keep investigating. Would your friends accept this? Are they okay with that? Is your family talk about it? I think people are talking about this more and more and more every day. So guess who I have on the show for you today? I've got Nick Pope. He is an expert. He is part of the Ancient Aliens show live. He worked for the U.S. British government investigating UFOs, and he's going to come on and he is going to break down all of these different reports that are expected to come out, the NASA report, the AARO report, as well as, what the Department of Defense is talking about. He's going to analyze David Grush's testimony, where he told Congress that there are non-biologics that our government has access to. And guess what? Some private companies, possibly Lockheed Martin and others, have had access to these objects or these non-biologics for some time. That was actually in some of these reports in the Department of Defense Authorization Act, that there are these kind of black holes of money. And he's going to talk about that too. But before I get to Nick Pope, I'd like to tell you about Allegiance Gold. Gold and silver allow you to protect what you've worked so hard for and give you back the control and the privacy that you need. And because reputation is important to me, and because I want you to protect your assets and diversify, the only company I recommend is Allegiance Gold. Right now, you get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sara sent you. You'll get $5,000. Listen to this, of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that I sent you. So don't wait. Call or click today. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, SARA, or go to protectwithsara.com. We can't control the Biden administration, folks, but we can prepare. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, or protectwithsara.com. Everybody, I've got Nick Pope here. He is the former head of the UK government's UFO project. He's a writer. He's a friend. He is going to be on tour soon. An expert on unidentified aerial phenomena or unidentified flying objects, whatever you choose to call them. But he is not only an expert, he's been called before Congress. He has given testimony. And this is even though I'm having fun right now, this is a very serious subject matter because this deals with our own national security, right? I mean, this has been in the Western world, and even, I mean, the Chinese government's investigating this. So in the old Soviet days, they were investigating. Now the Russians. This is not just what's happening in America, but this has been a worldwide phenomena that is finally being accepted publicly, I think. Right, Nick?
Very much so. Yes. It's been officially acknowledged as both a safety of flight issue and a potential national security threat in the written reports, and we've had two now, from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So absolutely. And as you say, yeah, you're quite right. Russia has a program. China has a program. The United States, of course, has a program. And
Great Britain had a program, correct?
Yes. But we're hearing more about the US, of course, because compared to China or Russia, we are democracy, comparatively free and open country, free press, generally speaking. I won't go there, but obviously compared to Russia and China, we're having public hearings in Congress, more of those in the pipeline, and so absolutely, this subject has come.
Why do you think, Nick, it's become such a bipartisan issue too? Because I think what's fascinating about with everything that divides us, this is the one thing that I've seen both Democrats and Republicans on the same page about. The one thing, it's this quest to find out what we are seeing in our skies.
Well, I think, yes, it is, because that is a universal question, and it's not a party political question. I mean, my goodness, I think people are probably fed up with everything being politicized these days. Here's one big issue that isn't. And my goodness, it's not just Republicans and Democrats. I mean, look at them. Can you imagine Tim Burchett and AOC agreeing on anything except this? And yet here they are. And we have some big guns too on both sides of the political aisle. So we have people like Marco Rubio on one side and Chuck Schumer on the other, speaking about this publicly, putting their name with Chuck Schumer to an amendment for next year's National Defense Authorization Act, which reads like sci-fi.
Yeah, it does. And I think this is really fascinating because you and I were discussing this just a bit. And I want you to talk about how important this is, because under President Donald Trump, he was able to put that authorization into for the investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena, for those reports, into the COVID bill, the COVID relief bill. He did not add them to the continuing resolution. And the reason was they were very afraid that it would be removed. This way, it wasn't removed. And you were saying this is very similar to the Defense Authorization Act. They know this is going to pass. That is why they put it in there, right?
That's absolutely right. If this came as a standalone piece of legislation, there's always a chance that it could be knocked out. But the trick is to embed it in a must-pass piece of legislation. And as you say, the COVID relief bill was one such piece of legislation. Now the National Defense Authorization Act. We have multiple UFO-related provisions in the current bill, and the ones being drafted for the 2024 bill are even more robust.
Let's talk about those. Bring some of those topics up, because I don't think our audience is aware of how deep this goes.
Well, Chuck Schumer put his name to a 64-page amendment for next year's NDAA. And it is surreal. The phrase non-human intelligence appears in that 64-page amendment, I think, over 20 times. And it's surreal looking at the beginning, of course, you've got the definitions. And I don't have it in front of me, but as you can imagine, it's non-human intelligence is defined as any sentient life form, and you think, wait a minute, what am I reading here? And then you realize you're reading something from the Senate Majority Leader that's going into the defense bill, and it's talking about UFOs. And I think a lot of people don't have the understanding, the visibility that this is going on. And it's the biggest potential story of all time.
It is the biggest story of all time, in my opinion, as well. I want to play this clip. This is one of the primary reasons, and it was brought up in a hearing. It was David Grush's testimony before the U.S. Congress. This is just one of many of the explosive clips that came from this hearing. And this is the reason why I think people need to be paying very close attention to why that language in the Defense Authorization Bill is so important, especially when you talk about non-human or biologics.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
That is pretty incredible information. I mean, I don't know. I was stunned that somebody came forward with that, because we had been talking about the craft, we had been talking about sightings, we had been talking about timing them, the USS Nimitz 2004 incident with, the Tic Tac, incidents. But we had never had anyone other than reports and, people who were eyewitnesses, maybe during Roswell and stuff, actually talk about non-human biologics. What do you think is going on, and what do you know? Because I know you know things that I don't know, Nick. I know you do.
Well, I don't know about this one. I was not read into this program for sure. And the Congress is having a lot of difficulty, obviously, trying to even get David Grush into a secure environment where he can relate some of this. So no, I was not read into that particular program or programs. But yes, everything that we've heard for years in the UFO community and the conspiracy theory community about crash retrieval programs, reverse engineering programs, David Grush has testified to Congress under oath that this is all true. And of course, as you know, Congress don't just let people walk in off the streets and tell these sorts of stories. This guy had to be extensively vetted before he even got in the room, before he got even close to a staffer, let alone up there giving testimony. He was vetted. Several individuals still serving and formerly serving in the intelligence community vouched for him, said this guy is the real deal. He did verifiably serve on the old UAPTF, the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. He was the representative at first from the National Reconnaissance Office, then latterly from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. This is someone who worked on the program saying it's all true.
That's what's so incredible to me, is that Now we're seeing, and I think we saw that you've always been forward. You came forward before many people did. You were one of the pioneers of disclosure, I believe, or at least asking the governments to question what we're seeing in the skies publicly, because there were so many people that were afraid. Pilots. I remember a British Airways pilot who, saw something outside of his cockpit while he was flying. I mean, people were nervous to come forward about these sightings. And unfortunately, many times the government forced them to be quiet. They were afraid of being called kooks, or that they were crazy, or, it's a conspiracy theory, or maybe what you saw was just a balloon, a weather balloon, a phenomena. You were one of the first to come forward, but then we see now Lou Elizondo came forward, and he was head of ATIP at the Pentagon at one point in time. And then, others are coming forward. Chris Mellon, who worked as an assistant secretary of defense at the Pentagon. What's going on here? Are we on a path to disclosure? Is the government finally saying, let's just get little bits of the truth out there, so when it happens, it won't be such a shock to the system?
I think there are two parallel possibilities here. One, as you say, this is some sort of acclimatization program to gradually unpack this a piece at a time, so that there isn't, and I think it was David Grush who's used this phrase, there isn't this huge ontological shock of suddenly getting it all out at once. My fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone.
Right.
Bang. There's a feeling that you couldn't do that. It would be too much. I mean, look at, this is a separate program, but look at the reaction to COVID. And a global pandemic was an anticipated event. We had contingency plans, and yet the whole world went mad. What would happen with something like this, which would maybe be too big to handle? So one argument, yes, is that this is being drip fed out to us piece by piece. But I think there's another argument, which I rather favor, that answers your question by saying what's really going on right now is factional fighting between different parts of the government, the military, and the intelligence agencies. My best assessment is that there's what I would call a believer faction and a skeptic faction, or certainly a faction that wants to disclose and a faction that doesn't. And they are struggling for power, and they are struggling for narrative control, sometimes fighting it out through a sort of proxy war in the media. So that's my assessment of what's going on right now.
That's pretty fascinating, because that was really and I know Lou Elizondo very well, and that was kind of my assessment of why he was doing what he was doing. He was at the point where it was like, people need to know about this. We need to be aware of what is going on in our skies. We need to understand, and our government needs to understand, that there is a very real possible threat, maybe not so much a threat, but whatever it is, we can't keep this from the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is investigating it as well. We just can't keep it from our people. Does that mean that our government, and maybe I'm going to go really far here, maybe I'm not, but do you believe there are people within our government, programs within the government, and this is just a hypothetical, or maybe this is just what you believe, that have already been in contact with whatever these non-biologics are, or biologics, I don't know what they are, who absolutely know that our planet is not the only place where intelligent life exists, and they're either trying to keep that from us, or they realize it's coming to a point where they have to release that information to us because they won't be able to keep it hidden for much longer?
I think that latter point is really important. And yes, absolutely, this is a global phenomenon. So the US can't just forge ahead in isolation. And that's why it's important that we had recently, which was confirmed by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who's the director of Arrow. It's why it's important that the Five Eyes intelligence sharing alliance is now engaged on this. So that, of course, is the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. We don't know much about what happened, of course, because all the various other nations are just hiding behind the usual policy of not commenting on intelligence matters. But there is one other aspect to this, which I think is very important, and that's the idea we've talked about government, but some of the people in what I call this believer faction, and I think, yeah, sure, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, you could say that these people, a lot of them have taken this issue, David Grush too, they've taken it as far as they can from inside of government, and they've come up against this point where it's now like, well, now I'm going to try and take it forward outside government, and it's still working with people in the system. And David Grush said, for example, that he's interviewed 40 or so people who've worked directly on these programs, and that he's given this information not just to, I think, the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee, or rather the people on those committees with sufficient security clearances, but also to the Intelligence Community Inspector General, to whom he has made a complaint about some of these programs being run off the books, probably illegally. But it may be that only the so-called Gang of Eight have sufficient security clearance to even assess these allegations. But just let me finish one little point on this before I forget. One, because it ties back with what you asked about Chuck Schumer's amendment.
You just sparked all kinds of thoughts in my head. So go ahead and finish.
Well, a final thought on this. One of the points in Chuck Schumer's 64-page amendment talks about eminent domain. And this is just fascinating because, of course, for years, it's been alleged that some of these programs have been further hidden from the public, taken further outside the scope of the Freedom of Information Act by putting them into the private sector, as we saw with ATIP,
right,
for example. And so one of the things in the next defense bill, if it doesn't get knocked out in the negotiation stage, is likely to be eminent domain, which will require the government to take back any hardware, any biological material, whatever it is relating to non-human intelligences from any private sector entity or individual who has this. And I mean, I joke about this. It's like the government going up to Lockheed or whoever and saying, please, can we have our spaceship back?
It's like Skunk Works is not going to just turn it over. I don't believe
Well,
it will be a battle because can't they fight that on this is our property, our investment? I mean, I'm sure the government is invested most of the money in that. That's what you're talking about. Black ops, these operations that are occurring outside the scope of government using taxpayer dollars. But what about reverse engineering? What about that? I mean, there's just no way. I can't even imagine Lockheed Martin or Boeing or any of these agencies turning things back over when they think that possibly even our adversaries have access to reverse engineering this and that they may be the best at doing it.
Well, certainly no one wants to disclose any of this in a situation where an adversary like China or Russia would acquire any knowledge, let alone hardware, direct evidence that would help them weaponize something against us. But interestingly, Ross Coulthart, an investigative journalist who's done a lot to break the David Grush story open, he has some evidence which has come to him suggesting, counterintuitively perhaps, that the company or companies concerned actually don't want to get into a dogfight over this. And he has some indication that the phrase that's been used is they are trying to divest themselves of this. And I think one possible reason was, let's suppose all this is true. Let's suppose Roswell and other stories all happened. Maybe they haven't managed to figure the technology out, in which case it's not a case of, well, heck, we were on the verge of back engineering something. We don't want to lose it. But maybe it is the sort of head shaking, well, we can't figure it out. So actually, I don't mind handing it back to the government.
That'll be very interesting. That is an interesting way of looking at it. I mean, I've never seen a company I would imagine private companies would be reluctant to turn over anything, especially, you know, how much they protect their own intellectual property. They would just be very maybe adverse to that unless they said like, hey, we already have that, you know, kind of figured out. We've had it for this long. Let's turn it back over to the government and let's see what the government does with it. But what's very interesting to me, and this is going back to my, you know, investigative journalism side, was when I covered the war. A lot of times what would happen is the, you know, research and development is so slow in the government as compared to the private sector, where like you could have the private sector could develop something far more rapidly, far more efficiently than the government. I think what's interesting here is what you said, and that was where my brain was getting all the little sparks and everything, you know, is the fact that, you know, we do have these black holes of money that we can't figure out. Like as an investigative journalist, we would see that money would just be like, where did that money go? And a lot of times it would happen either in the Pentagon or with other intelligence agencies or with our military, where we would see, oh, the Office of Net Assessment was supposed to be doing this, but actually all this money went there and we don't know where that money went because only a small portion of it went to what it said it was going to do. And that's when you discover it. What I think is really fascinating here is that we could have, like in the movie Independence Day, all these like separate, you know, little, you know, laboratories and people working on various different projects with money that, and such secrecy that maybe not even the president knows about it. That maybe it's so
That's
secret
possible.
that even our own government would have a hard time finding it. Like they could just turn over part of it, but not all of it.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, particularly if this is, as is claimed, something that goes back decades. So you could imagine bits here, bits there. I think one thing that would obviously incentivize a company that had this to give it up, maybe even proactively before the legislation is passed, is that threat that once it's in the bill, they would be breaking the law if they then were obstructing any of this. So I think two things can focus people's minds. One is the threat of legal sanction, and one, obviously, you've just mentioned, is the money. And that's why I think one of the other big important things in the 2024 defense bill relating to UAP will be this provision that any UAP-related program that is not under proper congressional authorization and oversight may have no funds. And so they're going after the money.
Which is always, I think, the most important thing if you want to get to the truth is go after the money, because once you put the squeeze, you know, that's it, you know, that people will buckle, especially in the government. Thank you for joining us here today. Make sure you are subscribed down below and on your favorite podcast app so we can bring you the latest news on UAPs or UFOs, whatever you like. Thank you. It really does make a difference. Let me ask you this. Do you think, and then I'm going to go on to the other reports, do you believe that is there any witness out there that has ever testified that I may not know about that actually is credible, that says, look, they are on our planet and they are among us, whatever entities these are, whatever biologics that Gersh was referring to, they are here?
I've heard those stories, of course, as have you, I'm sure, for many years in the UFO community. I have not, I'll have to be honest on this, I've not heard those stories from anyone within government, but I'd be very interested. I think it's a great point, and I'd be very interested to hear what David Grush says about that and what some of the 40 or so people that he's spoken to on this issue, some of whom he says are directly involved in these programs. I'd be interested to see what they say on that. And we may not have to wait too much longer. I mean, David Grush obviously has testified, but other whistleblowers have already come forward.
Right.
Some to Congress, some to the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, and some to both. And so what's happening right now is that a lot of vetting of these individuals is going on, obviously, to make sure they are who they say they are. And I would not be surprised if some more whistleblowers went public within, maybe weeks, not necessarily even months.
Oh, that is interesting. I certainly hope that is the case. Let me ask you about the NASA report. What's interesting about the NASA report to me, because it's now we're getting all of these agencies focused and hyper-focused on what is happening in space. The NASA report states that they'll have measurement equipment in space to kind of measure what we are seeing in the skies, what eyewitnesses have seen in the skies. I know one of the big issues for Space Force, which was the reason why Space Force, a big reason why it was created. And I've interviewed people that were, involved in the creation of Space Force, is the ownership of space. The ownership of space is it sounds kind of crazy, but it's very important when it's around our planet. And it's our ability for our satellites to operate and to basically our ability for the United States to have operational control over its satellite systems, something we don't want China to have, obviously, or access to, or adversaries. But we're also dealing with these anomalies. This is where the national security issue comes in, right? The national security issue. How do these highly intelligent, incredibly, I guess, alien vehicles, how will they affect us in the future as we move forward with our own technology? And we're developing, from nuclear to God only knows what else, hypersonic, space travel, Elon Musk going to Mars. How will this affect us as a species, as a race moving forward in this vast universe?
Well, it's complicated, is the short answer. There are, as you know, a whole bunch of laws and treaties governing all of this, some of them national, some of them under the auspices of the United Nations. The Outer Space Act of 1967 is, I think, one such thing. But then you have people like Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb, who says you can't classify the sky. Well, I think the government would if it could, but absolutely NASA, but also the various other parts of the US intelligence community and other people around the world do have all sorts of space tracking radar systems, other monitoring systems to see what's out there. And I think the NASA report, obviously the NASA report is going to be at unclassified level. They were fairly clear on that. So we're not going to see too much. I think what we will see in the NASA report, which is now overdue, by the way, it should come out in September, but it's late. What we should see is, I think, a blueprint for how NASA can leverage its scientific and technical knowledge, resources, and capabilities and bring them to bear on the wider UAP issue and help the AARO as part of its overarching mission here. So, I think what's great about NASA is that until recently, they said publicly, we're not interested in UFOs. We're not looking at this. It's not our business. And then Bill Nelson, when he got appointed as NASA administrator, said, right, we need to get in the game. And what was fascinating about that is, of course, Bill Nelson used to sit on I think, the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he got the classified UAP briefing when he was there. And so when he got the top job at NASA, I think it's very telling that one of the first things he did was say, we need to do a study. So I'm not expecting huge things from it, but it's another important milestone in this process.
Where have people seen the majority of the sightings? Is there like an assessment of like where these sightings take place, and are the various vehicles different? Like, I think this to me is really fascinating. You know, when I spoke to Lou Elizondo, and he talked about, you know, the Montana situation with the reactor, the nuclear reactor, and then in Moscow, another issue with the nuclear reactor there in Montana. Obviously, it was reported that these vehicles shut down the reactor. I mean, I'm sorry, our ICBM warheads it's our nuclear warheads shut down the control of those nuclear warheads in Russia. Apparently, it was turned on. I hope I'm saying that correctly. That they intervened with our military. They were able to do that, and our military had no control over it whatsoever. That was pretty terrifying situation. But where are we seeing most of these? Is it around military installations, or is it just random?
Well, it's a really difficult question. The other day, when Arrow finally got around to publishing their website, which is just arrow.mil, they put up as part of that a PowerPoint presentation, which I'd actually seen before. And it was a map of the world where they said these are the UFO hotspots. But it was, frankly, it was pretty poor stuff, because it was self-evidently, it was places where the United States was present. I mean, it was with the military. So the map highlighted the continental United States, the Middle East, and Japan. Well, that's where we have bases and a presence. So none of these, all this talk of hotspots ignores the question of collection bias, i.e., you know, are we seeing more sightings simply because these areas are more heavily surveilled? And it also ignores all the sorts of statistical confounds like population and population density. But absolutely, the question of, is there a connection between UFOs and nuclear facilities? That's one of the things in the 2023 defense bill. So Congress has already put a remit on the Pentagon to answer that question and to report on whether this is just collection bias or whether this UFOs and nukes connection is a real thing.
Right. And that the ability for these craft to just transfer from the sky to water and be able to move underwater and we've seen that around, apparently these are reports coming from our U.S. military. We've seen that around our military. Our Navy has reported this many, many times. Has the British military also reported on this many, many times in recent? I mean, have there been recent, I don't know if you still have sources there or not, or see the reports, but are the British also reporting on this, or are there any other nations that are coming more forward, Western nations, with this information?
Well, the public-facing part of the MOD, the UK Ministry of Defence's UFO program, where I worked, was terminated at the end of 2009. But I still talk to people. I still have some contacts. It's not like the phenomenon hasn't stopped. The sighting hasn't stopped. There is talk that British military facilities, such as the space tracking radar system at Royal Air Force Fylingdales in Yorkshire, may have a part to play in the global investigative effort on this. And I mentioned earlier the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance is now engaged on the UAP issue. So things are going on. So these sightings are continuing. I don't have specific details of whether for example, the Royal Navy in the UK has similar reports to the US Navy about these fast-moving underwater contacts. I know obviously there's a wider concern about the technology behind, for example, supercavitation, and the idea of a supercavitating torpedo is something of concern to navies all around the world. If you asked me to bet, I would say it would be inconceivable that this wasn't going on at some level, and that's probably within the defense intelligence staff in the United Kingdom. After the closing of the public-facing side of this, research and investigation is continuing, and discussions are going on with our U.S. counterparts.
And maybe this is, and I could have you on for hours. I could just talk to you, Nick, forever, but I know I can't keep you forever. I know you have so many more things to do. But is there a global consortium like in the past? I know France led the way at one point with UFO investigations and came forward. I've heard reports from Peru. I've spoken to a military official who gave testimony at one point. This was way back when, gosh, maybe 2010 in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you remember that, the very first congressional hearing where they brought people from all over the world to speak about UFOs and what they had seen. Is there a world consortium? Is there anything outside of the government or by the governments where we are going to have, a meeting of the minds, so to speak, after this? Or is this just mostly U.S. focused?
It's largely US focused. I mean, absolutely things are going on. Many nations have UFO programs. There's not much discussion or interface between them. As I say, the Five Eyes UAP panel may change that. Obviously, we're very unlikely to be sitting down with China and Russia about this. A couple of years ago, actually, the SecDef did sit down, I think, with his opposite number in Japan and have some bilateral discussions where this came up. But then they got so many media inquiries about that they didn't make any announcements about other bilateral discussions that may have gone on. But I'm sure it comes up. There's occasionally talk that maybe this should be taken to the United Nations. But last time I had any discussions with anyone at the UN about this, they didn't want it. So I think it's what I'd call a sort of loose confederation of allies are talking about this. The Five Eyes may formalize that a little bit more, but of course the media and the public won't get to hear about that.
Well, I think the media and the public will get to hear about this through you and through the History Channel is doing you're going on tour, right? Ancient Aliens, and you will be talking to folks in various cities. Tell us a little bit about that, because I don't want to let you go until everyone hears about this, because folks, I will be attending. I will go and I'm going to find him at one of these events. And I'm going to sit there in awe. I love the work that you do. And I love when you speak publicly, because I can see how interested the majority of the public is in this. And the people that come to these events are just wonderful, wonderful people that are there to hear and learn. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, sure, yes. And absolutely, the fans of the TV show Ancient Aliens and the people who come to the live stage event, Ancient Aliens Live, their passion, their enthusiasm, their knowledge is amazing to see. And Ancient Aliens Live is a 90-minute live show in person. We go into theaters. We've done about 25 maybe already over the last year or so. We have, I think, 20 or 21 shows advertised at present on the website, which is ancientalienslive.tour.com. We're going to Seattle, Portland, Eugene, Wichita. We're going to Jacksonville. We're going to Lynn. We're going to Kalamazoo. We're going all over the United States, all different. We're going to Anaheim. Different regions, different states. And it will be, generally speaking, it's four of us. Giorgio Tsoukalos, the guy with the hair.
Yes, the hair.
David Childress.
We got to talk about his hair. Did you ever ask him? Did you ever say, like, was it the UFO first or your hair? Did the hair come first or the UFO? I just don't know.
I think, Sarah, that's classified. That's classified.
I'm bringing him on the show. That is going to be my first question. Of course it's classified. Only Chuck Schumer and Marco Rubio know the answer to his hair. That's it. I'm positive of that. But he cut it a little shorter now. He cut it a little shorter, but it's still in every direction. And it amazes me. It amazes me because it never moves.
Yeah, but he's super smart. He's a
genius.
He's not just... Yeah, he's not just a colleague on the show and at the live events.
He's
a friend.
He's not all hair.
Obviously. No. I mean, this is a guy who can talk about geology one moment, linguistic anthropology the next.
Yeah, he's very smart.
Just seamlessly changing lanes. He bridges his knowledge of the ancient world and some of the old sacred sites and monuments with more modern talk about this. And he's great. We have David Childress, the real life Indiana Jones. We have William Henry, the spiritual voice of the show. For some of the events, we have Dr. Travis Taylor, not many because he's at Skinwalker Ranch, of course.
Right.
And what a lot of people don't realize about Travis is that for a time, he served as the chief scientist on the UAP task force under Jay Stratton when Jay was director. So here's somebody else with inside government knowledge of this.
I mean, and he's a physicist. I mean, he follows the scientific method. And it was really interesting because I ran into, this is going to probably blow your mind, but he's the AG, the Attorney General out of Utah, Reyes, who was also involved in the whole Skinwalker Ranch issue. And maybe we'll do a special on that. But I met him during an anti-trafficking campaign that I'm involved in against human trafficking. And he was also telling me about, his work with, obviously with everybody at Skinwalker Ranch. But it was just fascinating to me, just the amazing amount of people, highly educated, really, worldly, that have come out and said, look, we need to investigate this. There is something going on here in our skies, in our world that we don't understand. And as scientists and as educators, we need to take that leap forward and say, hey, whatever it is, it's there. We need to figure it out and we need to understand it because it could pose a direct threat to us, or even more so, it could answer those questions I think that all of us have about who we are and our place in the universe, and how miraculous to find out, you know what? It's not just us floating on a ball somewhere in this vast emptiness, but out there among those billions and billions and billions of stars and galaxies and solar systems, there may be intelligent life that's looking for those same answers as well.
Absolutely. It's one of the biggest and most profound questions we can ask ourselves. And why wouldn't we? Through the scientific method, through people like Professor Avi Loeb, Dr. Travis Taylor, why wouldn't we want to try and find answers to those questions using the scientific method? Absolutely. But you hypothesize, then you observe, you gather your data, you analyze your data, and then you peer review and publish your results.
Right.
And how wonderful that finally science and academia, through people like whether it's Michio Kaku, Avi Loeb, Travis Taylor, whoever it is, science and academia are now looking at this seriously and saying, look, we've been missing a trick by just treating all this as crazy stuff. We need to look at it, apply the scientific method, but see what we've got. And my goodness, the results could change the world.
And they absolutely will. And you're a part of that, and you're making history, and you're giving us something. And thank God we live in a world where we still have mystery, where we're still searching. And I think we always will as human beings. We will always quest and strive for more. I think that's what makes us so unique and beautiful in this universe, is that we do have this ability to want to learn more, to want to strive for more, and to want to go to the stars. And the next time I'm going to bring you on, we're going to talk about that, about going to Mars and what that means. And, we're right there. We're on the verge of that. I thank you so much, Nick, for being a part of the Sara Carter Show. It means so much to me, our friendship. Folks out there, I want you to go ancientaliensLiveTour.com. That is ancientaliensLiveTour.com. And believe me, I didn't ask him to come on the show or anything to talk about ancientaliensLiveTour.com. I was so excited when I saw you last night just by accident on the History Channel. And I thought, I want to go to that. I want to go to the show. And I'm so glad it's ongoing, and it's going to go through 2024. So everybody get out there. For those of you who are fans, you do not want to miss this show. These are the world-renowned experts in the quest for life outside our planet. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thanks, Sara. Great to talk to you as ever, and look forward to seeing you on the tour.
Again, thank you, Nick Pope, for joining us here today. And thank you. Thank you for being a part of the Sara Carter Show. I know that you're busy. I know that you could be at home, like I said, cleaning, taking care of the kids, driving around, doing errands, or just sitting at work, eating lunch or listening to my cat meow in the background, but you're here with me on this show every day. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. The truth is out there, folks. We just can't be afraid to look for it. Remember, don't be afraid of the truth. Once we know the truth, then we can plan from there. And if there are aliens in this world, I have to believe that Biden is probably a lizard. If you love today's show and want even more of the Sara Carter Show, make sure you rate this podcast 5 stars and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on X at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. God bless all the aliens out there and my cat. And God bless the great state of Texas.